Welcome to Milan Recording Studios. My name is James Pavel Shakras, and in today's video, in the third installment of the Time Capsule series, I'm bringing to you a 39-year-old Moog Prodigy synthesizer. I've never actually reviewed a true analog subtractive synthesizer before on this channel, and this is actually the first one that I'm featuring, and it's a particularly interesting instrument to feature in this Time Capsule series, because it comes from a time when music was changing radically. The synthesizer was completely dominating the forces of music during the 70s and the 80s. This instrument came from 1982. And Moog began creating synthesizers, and they began gaining popularity in the late 60s and was creating sounds and tones that no one had ever heard of before in the world. And it was completely revolutionary, completely brand new, and from then on, it completely changed the face of what modern pop music has become. The sort of tones and the sort of sounds that this instrument makes, although you may expect them to be cheesy, considering it's an electronic instrument from 39 years ago, they still sound amazing to this day. And sounds that this instrument can produce are still found and still emulated and still aimed for in modern music to this day, which I think is really, really incredible. This instrument is also all original. Its story is rather interesting. The owner who I bought this off of was actually the original owner. He bought it when he was a teenager for use in his garage band, and although you might expect a teenager in a garage band to perhaps not treat an instrument well, he treated this with love and care and respect, and it really, really shows. There is hardly a scratch on the instrument, and there's a few minor blemishes, but it's 39 years old. It's incredible. It's in beautiful condition, and it all works perfectly to the best of my knowledge. Every key works. I didn't even need to clean the key contacts. Every single knob and switch works on here flawlessly, and it's in beautiful, beautiful condition. And it sounds just as good today, 39 years later, as it does the day it left the box. Something else really interesting about this instrument is that they've actually gone up in value, as many Moog synths have. Some, like the Minimoog and things, are really, really sought after. The Moog Prodigy, a little bit less so, but it still is revered in many circles. In fact, there was even an entire band who named themselves Prodigy after this very synthesizer. Which is really cool. So originally my understanding is, and information differs on this instrument, the Wikipedia article on these seems to be full of, or maybe not full of, but at least has some misinformation in there. Wikipedia says they went for just a few £100, but I think the more logical answer, I think, would probably be more around $800 or $900 US if you were to buy one of these new back in 1980. And today they actually can cost, the lowest prices I've seen are $1,200 to $1,300, and they only go up from there. There actually was on Reverb at one time a brand new in-box Moog Prodigy from 1985, and they wanted like $2,300 for it. So finding an instrument like this in almost perfect, brand new condition at a reasonable price is not particularly easy. So these instruments have held their value well, they've stood the test of time, and that, I think, is one of the reasons Moog is still revered and still loved to this day. To this day, they still continue to produce very high-quality, handcrafted analog synthesizers and other such pieces of equipment, which is very, very interesting. So I think it's about time that we dive into the interesting sounds and tones that this Moog Prodigy can produce. Basically, what I'm just going to do is show you all of the knobs and all of the switches and everything that it can do, and I'll show you just about a lot of the things it can do. I'm not going to be able to cover every single tone and timbre that it can produce because there's practically an infinite amount of them. A lot of people, perhaps the only negative thing I've ever heard about the Moog Prodigy is that it is a simple synthesizer. It was actually originally intended to be an entry-level synth. And that's basically what it is for me. This is my first analog synthesizer ever, and it's phenomenal for that. It's simple, it does enough things that it maintains your interest for hours on end, but yet it's simple enough and easy enough to understand that anyone, including myself, who knows very little about synthesizers and how they work, after reading the owner's manual and playing with it, you can gain a basic understanding of how to get what tones and just basically have fun with it. So that's what we're going to be doing in today's video, is checking out the Moog Prodigy, seeing many of the fascinating tones that it can do, and basically just having fun. I absolutely love this instrument, and I will be including it in videos whenever I can, when it sounds good here at the studio. I really hope to find some way, perhaps as a bass line, as a lead, something, to find some kind of a way for this instrument to fit in. Something I often talk about all the time in my videos is the build quality. What is the build quality of the Moog Prodigy like? It's incredible. You've got metal on the top. The little cheek blocks, I think, are actually part of this metal piece, so they're also metal. The pitch and mod wheels feel really, really nice and just smooth and really beautiful. All of these knobs and potentiometers feel great. These switches, are really nice and satisfying. You've got real wood along the outside here, which is an aesthetic that has remained popular to this day, which is very cool. The earliest Moog synthesizers had, you know, your black metal front here, and then you had wood on the sides, and that's remained popular to this day. And the back panel here as well is also metal too. So the build quality of it has stood the test of time. The electronics, interestingly enough, have also stood the test of time. All original, all working perfectly. So let's dive into this and check out some of the stuff it can do. I hope you guys enjoy. So let's dive into this classic and take a look and see what it can do. What I'm actually going to do first is play you one of my absolute favorite sounds, one of my favorite patches that it can do. And once I play that for a few little minutes here, I'm going to actually remove all of the filter effects and the modulation effects, and we're just going to go through and show you all of the individual sections of the synthesizer and show you all of what each and every knob and switch does. So hopefully this will be fun, and hopefully you guys enjoy. I'm going to show you everything that I know about the Moog Prodigy in today's video, so I think that will be really fun. But first, let's take a listen here to this first sound. I really love this, and I think it sounds really pretty. So with that, as a little taste of what this instrument can do, let me remove all of the effects that it is adding, and basically we will just go into this and show you what it can do. So this is a 2-oscillator synthesizer, and what that means is you basically have 2 different waveforms that you can use at the same time. These are the volume controls for your Oscillator 1 and your Oscillator 2 controls. And these up here is your controls for Oscillator 1 and for Oscillator 2. So for each oscillator, you have 3 different waveforms. So let me show you those. This is the sound of a triangle wave. So that there at the end is just the sound of Oscillator 1. You have 2 different volume controls here, so you can actually mix the 2 oscillators together. That's what you were hearing at first, but here once again is just the triangle wave for Oscillator 1. You also have a sawtooth wave, which is a bit more aggressive and punchy. And you also have a pulse wave on Oscillator 1 as well, which is your right-hand most wavelength here. So you've got 3 different, subtly different waveforms, and I say subtly, but in reality they're actually vastly different. Let me just give you a back-to-back comparison of how they sound. You can hear that the triangle wave in particular is a lot different than the other 2. You also have octave shifts here as well, so you can make Oscillator 1 be at a 32-foot pitch, a 16-foot pitch, or an 8-foot pitch, and these numbers are actually coming from the very old days of pipe organs, when the lowest pitch of a rank of pipes would be labeled as the longest pipe in that rank. So you got your 32-foot stop, your 16-foot stop, your 8-foot stop, and those would all be in intervals of octaves. So your 32-foot stop would be 1 octave lower than your 16-foot stop, and that's exactly how this works here. Take a listen. So you have a lot of control over just one oscillator of what pitches it can play and what ranges it can do. So that's very, very cool. I'm going to put that on the sawtooth wave, and then we're going to come down here and take a listen to Oscillator 2. Now, Oscillator 2 is, for all intents and purposes, nearly identical to Oscillator 1 with a couple of differences. First of all, it doesn't go down to 32 feet. Its lowest pitch is 16 feet and it goes up to 4 feet. So oscillator 2 is higher pitched than oscillator 1, but you can make them be at the same pitch if you wanted them to. The waveforms are also slightly different for oscillator 2. Instead of having a pulse wave, you have a square wave. Very similar, but slightly different. Let me just run you through the different waveforms and ranges of oscillator 2. You also have the interval knob here with oscillator 2, and essentially what that does is when you have both of them running, it changes the interval between the two. You can have it be a unison, you can have it be a slightly detuned sound, or you can have it be something dissonant or something consonant. It's entirely up to you. So let's blend oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 together, and we will just experiment with the interval knob and see what kind of both beautiful and ugly sounds we can create. It's a lot of fun. So as you can hear, hours of fun can be had alone with just the interval pitch change between oscillator 1 and oscillator 2. You can get it, although this is a monophonic synth, meaning you can only play one note at a time, you can kind of convince it to play two notes at a time using that, and if you can do certain intervals, you can just simply color the tone, or you can actually basically just play in intervals with every note. It's a lot of fun. Now, there's also the mysterious sync oscillator 2 to oscillator 1 switch up here, and although I'm not exactly sure the science of this knob and what exactly it's doing, my understanding is that it's basically syncing the pitch of oscillator 1 to oscillator 2, and therefore instead of the pitch bend controlling the actual pitch of the oscillators, it then just basically turns it into noise, and it makes it very, very interesting. So this may or may not be your cup of tea, but in the right scenario, it certainly can be interesting. Now, normally with this off, the pitch bend, which is down here, controls your pitch. But if we turn this on, you'll hear that it no longer is controlling the pitch. So you can use that to get some really interesting distorted tones. Sometimes you can accentuate certain elements in the harmonic series and kind of just harmonically alter the tone, and sometimes it just sounds really gritty and distorted, which is very, very fun. So as you can see, just although this is as a whole a rather simple synth, it still is a lot of fun and it sounds great at what it does. I think it sounds absolutely amazing. And even with the simple oscillator section, you can have a lot of fun just messing around with the pitches and the frequencies and the waveforms and syncing them and changing the intervals. It is a lot of fun. But there's other ways that you can change the tone. These are just, what you're hearing here is just the raw oscillators. But with the filter and the modulation, you can actually apply a bunch of effects to these. One way you can color the tone, or at least change the tone, is with the Master Tune knob up here, and that is a pretty self-explanatory knob. It changes the tuning of the entire instrument. All pitches will go up and down. Even if you have the intervals of the two oscillators set to be not at unison, those will go down and up, in parallel when you turn this tune knob. So for example, so that's very useful because, first of all, because this is an analog synth, as you kind of use it and as it warms up, the pitch can actually kind of fluctuate a little bit. It doesn't fluctuate a lot with this instrument, and that's kind of one of the things that just is a fact with analog synthesizers, is that as you use them, as they warm up throughout use, the pitch and the tuning can actually change. If you're playing this with a live band, this tuning knob is going to be very, very useful, and you're probably going to find yourself using it a little bit here and there to tweak the sound. And you can also simply just use it to just match the pitch of an instrument that's not at concert pitch, which is really, really fantastic. Some of the instruments I have at the studio, the more oddball, unusual ones, aren't quite at concert pitch, and as a result, especially with some of the more extreme ones, like my 1890s Mason and Hamlin reed organ, I've thought to myself, oh, I'll never be able to use this with another instrument because it's at like 452. But I can use it with this. So maybe I'll do a video like that. A very strange combo, but it might be kind of fun. Another way you can change the tone of the instrument here is with the glide knob. Essentially, this is portamento, and I was using it in that beginning tone I showed you. And the effect of this knob is quite obvious and quite easy to understand. It glides between two pitches. For example, instead of it sounding like this, glide will make it sound like this. You can get absolutely crazy with the glide knob as well. With turning it all the way up, you get a very slow glide. Gliding all the way up and down the keyboard, which is very, very interesting for various musical effects. Another section here that you can use to color the tone of the oscillators is the modulation. This is basically your low-frequency oscillator. And a low-frequency oscillator, what that does is, although it doesn't create a pitch that we can hear, it uses that waveform and changes and applies it to your existing oscillators to change them in some way. For example, your default one here is going to be changing the pitch of these oscillators. So, for example, if I just turn the mod wheel, which this whole section is controlled by, you will hear that the pitch of these oscillators is going to start changing. And you can get really wacky with this. You can change the speed of how fast it goes with this knob here. So this is basically the rate of your LFO, your low frequency oscillator. So you can make it be very, very slow, or you can make it be very, very fast. You also have two different waveforms for this. What you're hearing right now is the triangle wave, but if you flip it over to the square waves, you get a very jumpy sound in between the pitch jumps, or the pitch changes, which can be very interesting. You can also route the LFO to not only change the pitch of the oscillators, which is controlled with this knob. If I push this to off, it will do nothing now. You can also route it to change the filter, which is controlled with this knob over here. By turning this to the on position, it will then begin to affect the filter and change the filter's envelope with the LFO. But we'll get to that in a little bit here. Before we move on to the filter, which there's a lot to talk about in the filter section, there's also the loudness contour over here. So this is basically going to change the attack, the delay, release, and sustain of your oscillators. Let's have a listen and just play with these knobs and see what kind of stuff we can do with those. So essentially, the attack will change how long it takes for the sounds to attack. The delay changes how long it takes for the sounds to decay. And the sustain changes how long the sound will sustain as you hold the key. It's really quite self-explanatory and intuitive, which is part of the reason I love the Moog Prodigy. It's really simple for a first-time synth user such as myself to come in and to know what these knobs can do and to be able to just sit down and have some fun with the instrument. And that, I think, is part of the reason I love it. That, I think, is just about everything there is to talk about outside of the filter, and there's a lot to discuss with the filter, so I think now it's about time to discuss the filter. First, what I'm going to do is, because I like how the filter sounds with a low bass sound, we are going to go with a very low bass tone. Now, there is actually a way to unlock an extra lower octave with the Moog Prodigy. You might think that the lowest note you can achieve is by pushing both of your oscillator sliders, pitch sliders, all the way down to their lowest position, and by playing the lowest note, you'd think that would be the lowest note on the instrument, which would sound like this. And it sounds pretty cool. But there's actually a way you can even go lower than that. By using the pitch, you can actually lower it by an entire seventh, and then using the tune knob, you can unlock a full lower octave, which is very interesting. I find it weird, and maybe this isn't supposed to be how this works, but for mine, the pitch actually doesn't move by an octave, it moves by a seventh, which is very strange. Check it out. So I find that kind of odd. Perhaps there's an adjustment somewhere you can change, or maybe that's how it was to begin with. But by using this pitch bend to go lower and then fixing the pitch with the tune knob, you can get some really low pitches with this, and it is amazing. Now let's play with the filter a bit. So what the filter does is essentially it cuts off frequencies. It's a cutoff filter. So basically the way this works here is you can use the cutoff frequency to change what frequency is going to be cut off, and then you can also use the emphasis knob to emphasize certain frequencies in the filter. So it's very, very interesting. So I'm going to play with these knobs and you'll hear what they do. Let's just mess with that. And the filter alone is a lot of fun. So that is just super, super cool. So as you can hear, the emphasis knob is kind of changing what frequencies are going to be emphasized. You can either have it simply just emphasize the low frequencies or emphasize very, very high frequencies. And then the cutoff frequency basically just changes at what range it cuts off the filter. Filters are very, very complicated for me as a first-time synth user, so I'm not exactly sure my understanding of that is perfect, but you can definitely tell that the filter knobs are able to change the sound very, very dramatically. Now, although this is a 2-oscillator synthesizer and you have one oscillator here and a second oscillator here, the filter can actually self-oscillate. If you take the filter knob and you turn it all the way up, you probably heard that it's actually creating a third tone, which you can actually change with the cutoff frequency. If you dial that in just right, you can actually use it to kind of enhance the tone of the instrument. Or you can also make it just sound really crazy. So we'll just mess with that a little bit. So while we're talking about the self-oscillating of the filters, it's a good time to talk about the keyboard tracking switch here, which is also very interesting. It took me a while to realize exactly what this was doing, but essentially this is changing how the filter reacts as you play different keys. And if I turn off the oscillators, we should be able to isolate the filter's self-oscillation by itself, as we can see there. So let me change the pitch so it's not really high-pitched. So what keyboard tracking does is essentially, if you have it off, the filter, its self-oscillation will always be the same pitch no matter what key you play on the instrument. If you put it at full, the filter will actually perfectly track every note that you play. So the filter's self-oscillation can be perfectly in tune with the note that you're playing, and it will adjust as normal. Or if you put it at half, essentially it will go up by a quarter tone, something like that. It just kind of cuts that functionality in half, so it's very interesting. As you can hear, the difference between filter keyboard tracking on half and filter keyboard tracking on full is quite vast. Let me turn back the oscillators on, and then we will start messing around with the filter contour, because that's also where things start to get pretty fun. It's where the filter can start doing things on its own every time you press a key. So let's turn these oscillators back on here, and I think just to keep things interesting, we will change the sound that we're going with as well. So I'm going to noodle about with the Moog, get a different sound here, and you'll just enjoy listening to the amazing sounds it produces. And once I come up with a satisfying tone that I think we can play with the filters, then we will go do that. So let's mess around with that for a bit. I think that sounds quite interesting. I'm using the pulse wave of oscillator 1 mixed with the sawtooth wave of oscillator 2, and I've got them ever so slightly detuned so that they sound very interesting, and they're both on the 16-foot stop. So the filter contour, what does it do? Well, essentially it allows the filter to make changes of its own every time you press the key. And that's done with the contour mount. When you have this down like this, it won't actually do anything. But once you turn it up, you'll begin to hear the filter doing things on its own. And much like the loudness contour, you also have filter contour knobs appear, which change the same sort of parameters: attack, decay, release, and sustain. So let's just mess around with this and just see what kind of stuff it does. Let's check it out. It's a lot of fun. So those are just some of the things the filter contort knobs can do. You can make the filter do things on its own, open and close every time you push a key. One interesting thing to note is that the envelope, I suppose you could say, will stay open as long as you play legato. So as you can hear, every time I push the key, the filter will be doing things on its own. But as long as I keep legato and I keep holding down and playing connectedly, that won't happen on every single note strike. Which is also very, very cool. Now, this is also where the filter mod knob comes into play as well. So then the low frequency oscillator is not controlling the pitch. I've turned that off. It is now controlling the filter itself. So now we can get some really interesting sounds. Let's play with that a bit. So that also can be had, you can have a lot of fun with that filter modulation. You can also combine the two to get filter and oscillator modulation, and you can get some very interesting sounds with these too. So you can create some noise, you can create some music, you can do all sorts of things with the Moog Prodigy. The final knob and switch that I haven't really talked about on this instrument is the release knob, and basically what this does is it's actually pretty simple. It basically just turns on and off the decay and release of the instrument. This can be very helpful when you're using the filter and you don't want it to be decaying. You can just simply hit that switch instead of playing with the decay knob, so it's a bit of a quicker way to make that happen. And that filter cutoff frequency knob is incredibly satisfying to play with. You can get all sorts of really, really cool tones with that, and it's just a lot of fun. So not only is the Moog Prodigy really good at making those low, rumbly bass sounds, but you can also crank everything up to the higher pitches and get some really nice high-pitched sounds too. It sounds really good across all the registers too. It's really fat and thick in the bass, but you can also get some really lovely high-pitched tones. I'm going to noodle around with it some more and get some of those out of it now. So essentially you can have a lot of fun with the Moog Prodigy, and I really, really enjoy playing with this instrument. It is a lot of fun, and I think that's probably just the biggest takeaway. Not only does it sound really good, but it's a lot of fun to use. It's built well, it's old and yet it still works perfectly. It's just a sign of an instrument that is well built and was meant to stand the test of time in many ways. Moog synthesizers, not necessarily the Prodigy, but many others and many others like the Prodigy, actually kind of sort of paved the way for much of the modern electronic music sound. The 1960s, these instruments were revolutionary, the original Moog synths, and the sort of tones that he was getting out of his instruments really helped pave the way forward for digital electronic instruments, and the Moog Prodigy is one of many synthesizers that has a really iconic, fascinating sound and that I love to play with. So I really hope that you guys have enjoyed this video of the Moog Prodigy synthesizer. I've never really done very many synthesizer videos before on the channel. There technically have been a couple. I think the Korg Triton technically was a synth, and so was the Casio Tone 202 that I reviewed. That technically was a synthesizer. But when I think of a synthesizer, I think of something like this, the analog synth, where you can come in there and start with the basic waveform and just add a bunch of things and subtract a bunch of things from it as well. That's really what you're doing. And just completely change that tone and have complete customization of the tone. That's something I love to see in instruments. That's why I loved the Viscount Legend 70s, because you had a lot of control over the tone, and that's why I love this instrument, because you have a lot of control over the tone. You start with a basic waveform, and you apply an LFO to it, you run it through the filter, and you can just completely, radically change everything about it, and it sounds amazing. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this video of the Moog Prodigy. Like I said, I've got a lot of requests for synthesizers, but it's never really anything I've really tapped into. I've really been focused on acoustic pianos at first on my channel, and then I got into the world of digital pianos, and now I'm getting into the world of synthesizers, and oh boy, is it a big one. So if you guys want to see me do more reviews of synthesizers, let me know, and give me some suggestions of ones you might want to see me review. There are many classics, many cool ones that I might be interested in reviewing, although all of them, much like the Moog Prodigy, have held their value and are still worth a lot to this day. The Minimoog, the Prophet 5, things like that, and also modern ones like Arturia, or the Matrix Brute and the Polybrute are also incredible synthesizers, but all of them are also very expensive. So if you guys wanted me to see more synthesizer videos, and you're really into those, you might want to think about donating to the Patreon page and joining that if you wanted to. It'll really help me go a long ways in to be able to purchase instruments like this in the future. So if you're interested in that, you might want to think about going and doing that. And if you just simply enjoyed this video, you might want to think about subscribing, which is completely free. If you do that, thank you very much, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.